Appreciate the applause. I'm not doing really very much to earn it, though. We'll save the joke for the halftime of the between the speakers. How about that? I am here to introduce our plenary keynote speakers for this session. We have Melissa Walsh-Innes and Matt Prindiville, and they will be speaking on producer responsibility programs and various other things. I believe Matt is going to go first, and I will read his introduction right now, and then I'll read Melissa's when she's about to speak. Matt Prindiville is the Associate Director for Upstream. Upstream is a national environmental policy organization dedicated to making products and packaging more sustainable. Matt helped found and currently coordinates the Cradle Squared, am I saying that right? Cradle Squared Coalition, a national network of public interest organizations focused on source reduction and comprehensive recycling of consumer products and packaging. Upstream and Cradle Squared bring together groups around the country to advocate for extended producer responsibility (EPR) policies, which hold producers responsible for waste and the life cycle impacts of their products. Prior to joining Upstream, Prindiville spent 8 years as Clean Production Project Director and several years as Legislative Director for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. He has been at the forefront of product stewardship and safer chemicals policy in Maine and the United States, working to pass groundbreaking EPR recycling programs for electronics and mercury-containing products, the phase-out of lead, mercury, and toxic brominated flame retardants, and the advancement of the nation's first comprehensive chemicals assessment program at the state level. You have been busy. As a policy and campaign strategist, he has helped develop and contribute to many coalition efforts to advance safer chemicals policy, mercury reduction, and product stewardship. So right now, my pleasure to introduce Matt Prindiville.
Thanks very much for that very nice introduction. Let me just start by saying it's my honor and privilege to be here with you folks today. I travel outside of the state about once or twice a month, and I attend a lot of different conferences. And I have to say that this is one of my favorite conferences. And it's not just because I live in Rockland and it only took me 5 minutes to get here this morning, although that was a nice bonus. First off, John and Victor and the folks at MRRA do an incredible job of getting dynamite speakers to come here. I mean, John Warner and Paul Conant are two of my personal heroes, so they do a fantastic job. And then secondly, I love my home state, and I am so proud that my home state has become a national leader on product stewardship and extended producer responsibility issues. And I credit that leadership to a lot of folks here in the room, people like Ron Slater and Troy Moon and Joan Welsh and many folks that have come to the State House over the years and testified, lobbied their legislators, and convinced policymakers that product stewardship is the right thing to do. So it's really my privilege and honor to be here among friends today. So I also know that this isn't the first time that you've had this topic as a keynote. I was in the audience 3 years ago in Northport when Brian Flaherty from Nestle Waters gave the keynote on the same topic, and that was when Nestle rolled out their 60% PET bottle recycling goal, and he said EPR for packaging was the way that we were going to do it. And I said at the Q&A, I said, well, Brian, you're already getting 90% plus of your bottles back here in Maine under an EPR system with incentives that we like to call the bottle bill. Why not just support bottle bills around the country? And I didn't get so much of a straight answer from Brian then, but I've talked to him a lot of times since then. I've talked to all kinds of people up and down the supply chain working on these issues, and I have some insights that I think will be useful to you as you think about what this policy could mean for the state of Maine. So I'm going to briefly talk about what EPR is. I'm going to talk about why packaging, why we're talking about that right now. And then I'm going to walk you through 3 different models for how EPR for packaging could be implemented here in the United States. So what's EPR? I mean, I like to think of EPR as make it, take it policy. So if you make something, then you should take responsibility for it. And it's about shifting the financial and management responsibilities for products and packaging when consumers are finished with them, away from local governments and taxpayers and upstream to producers and consumers. And so it's really about internalizing the costs of the environmental management of a product into the price of that product. Unfortunately, this concept doesn't really tell us anything about how we should assign that responsibility or how producers should discharge it. When we're talking about why EPR for packaging, this slide is often cited for why we need EPR for packaging. Packaging is about a third of the municipal solid waste stream by weight, and we currently waste over half of the materials that are put in the marketplace. And that's a lot of materials. It's also a lot of value. There's been some studies done that estimate that it's about $11.5 billion of materials that we are unnecessarily landfilling, incinerating, or littering in the United States every single year. Getting a little bit more into the why. So a lot of the why has to do with the conversation that I had with Brian Flaherty in front of you all about 3 years ago around the bottle bill. About 10 years ago, a number of large institutional investors, these are groups of investors that pool their efforts, and they own significant shares of our nation's big companies, they began to collectively put pressure on the beverage industry to support recycling policies. And specifically, they were asking them to support bottle bills. And the beverage industry said, well, thank you very much. We've been fighting bottle bills for 40 years. We're not going to turn on a dime here, but we will throw you guys a bone, and we'll agree to support voluntary recycling goals for our packaging. And so when they agreed to do that, they said, well, how are we going to do that? And they quickly realized that there's about 2 public policy options that they can use for that. One is EPR with incentives, which we call the bottle bill, or EPR without incentives. And they support, some of them support the latter, primarily because they do this in Europe and they know that it costs them less per unit. It's cheaper for them to do EPR without incentives than to do it with incentives through a bottle bill. And the other big reason they support that is because for years the beverage industry has been complaining that why are they the only ones that are being targeted to pay for their packaging, right? What about these guys? What about all these other big companies that put all kinds of packaging into the marketplace but aren't held responsible at all to help pay for recycling and recovery? I should also point out here that EPR and bottle bills can go hand in hand, and they often go hand in hand throughout the world. In many of the EU countries that have EPR for packaging programs, they also have deposits on certain kinds of containers. In British Columbia, where all the focus is right now, where they're rolling out an EPR for packaging program for packaging, they also have a bottle bill there. That bottle bill is not going anywhere. And so they can go hand in hand, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. Just a quick snapshot of where legislation is at in this country. The lime green are the bottle bill states. The dark green is where bills were introduced in 2013. There was a bill introduced in Rhode Island that I spent a lot of time on, and Melissa did, which had a couple of hearings and got relatively well down the process before it was decided to be postponed. There were placeholder bills, which did not have hearings, introduced in North Carolina and Minnesota. And there was a plastics-focused bill that was developed by the Natural Resources Defense Council, which was introduced in California. That bill would have also made producers responsible for helping to prevent marine plastic pollution by servicing and installing and servicing things like storm catchment drains and other strategies to help reduce plastic packaging washing out to the ocean. I'm now going to talk about the 3 different models for how EPR can be implemented here in the United States. I'm not going to summarize them here because I'm going to walk you through each one. The first is a product stewardship model. And this is where producers pay, but they don't manage. And this is the system that's currently in place in Quebec and Ontario. The way that it works is the producers get together and they convene a stewardship agency. The local governments do what they always do, they collect and market recyclables. And that stewardship agency works with the local governments to find out what are the net costs for municipalities for providing this recycling, collection and recycling service. And then based upon the cost drivers, The agency develops material or commodity-specific fees, so they'll have different fees for PET plastic, HDPE, glass, aluminum, etc., and they use those fees to raise revenues to partially or fully compensate the municipalities for their recycling and collection costs. Sounds good, right? Well, there are some issues with this system. There's really little to no producer self-determinacy. So the producers can't say, well, we like the way that they're doing things in Toronto, that they've got a really efficient system, low cost, and they're collecting all this stuff, but we don't like what they're doing in Ottawa. So we want those guys to shape up. They have no control over that at all. There's also, for the local governments, there's very little control on producer costs. This is really business as usual for the big companies, except that they pay a little bit of money for recycling. But they don't have to change packaging design. They're not left holding the bag at the end of the chain. So there's little control on the producer-driven costs that municipalities incur from having to deal with unrecyclable packaging and all this garbage packaging that's gumming up the MRFs. Also, the pricing of municipal services is typically a place for dispute. If you think about producers wanting to pay as little money as possible and the local governments wanting them to pay as much money as possible, the bickering has basically been in place, at least in Ontario, since the 90s when they started this program, and it continues today. And lastly, this is essentially producer taxation, and there's little incentive for increased recycling. This is not a goal-driven system. This is a system that says producers bear some kind of responsibility. Let's make them pay some of the costs. And as a good friend and colleague of mine likes to say, if the responsibility is shared, then no one is truly accountable for results. So that's a pretty stewardship model. So this is the collective EPR model, where producers pay and manage together. This is the model that's currently being rolled out in British Columbia. And what we like about this model is that producers have to collectively meet recycling targets. So basically the government is walking away and saying, okay, we've been dealing with your packaging for long enough, it's now your responsibility, and oh, by the way, we're going to let you guys figure out how to do it. And typically what the producers do is they form what's called a producer responsibility organization. And this essentially becomes a producer monopsony, which is, for those of you that are economics geeks, it's the opposite of a monopoly. So if a monopoly is one seller that's cornered the market and all the buyers have to go to that one seller, a monopsony is one buyer, many sellers. So all the local governments and waste haulers can only sell to one entity, and that's the PRO. Now these entities are sanctioned in Canada, and they have a tremendous amount of market authority and power. Now, producers have a couple of ways of using their monopsony. If government says it's now your responsibility and we're going to let you do it any way you want to, that's the first scenario. Basically, the producers then can contract out to whoever they want to help them meet that recycling target. It might be a 75% aggregate recycling target that they have to meet. And typically, the lowest bidders are going to win those contracts. I'll get to the issues with that in a minute, but you can already see that there's some serious issues with that. The other model is to functionally split collection and post-collection processing. So this basically means that the local governments still get to recycle how they want to recycle. They still get to contract with whatever waste hauler they want to contract with. And the producers really come in at the MRF. And that's where they start to pay for. They both incur the risks and also assume some of the benefits that would go from having to pay for the processing and then, of course, the benefits of selling the materials. And in order to achieve their goals, they don't have full control over the system like they do in the first scenario. They have to use a combination of financial incentives and contracts, essentially to local governments and waste haulers, which are now service providers to them, to help them meet these goals. What about the issues with collective EPR? Well, there's a lot of issues, right? I mean, at the beginning, the producers have little to no understanding of the markets that they're about to engage. And the gut response to contract out to the lowest bidder can lead to complete market chaos, and we're seeing a lot of chaos right now in British Columbia as they're starting to roll this out. What about competition? What about antitrust issues, right? I think there's been some justifiable concerns from a lot of folks in the waste industry that this is going to lead to the vertical integration of recycling services within a jurisdiction, and that it's hard to imagine big companies picking winners and losers in the system. We think that it's critically important, and no matter what system you do, if you do any kind of EPR system or product stewardship system, you need to have a baseline study to figure exactly how much packaging is coming into your province, into your province, state, or jurisdiction. You need to have really solid design, and you need to have really strong government oversight. And I think a lot of the place where the government oversight comes in is helping to design this, what's called a compliance scheme. So if we're making the producers responsible for meeting these goals, that doesn't mean that you just have to turn the keys over to the producers and let them do whatever they want, provided they meet those goals. The regulation can, and the agency can help determine how to best do that in such a way so that there are as many winners as possible while you're increasing your recycling and collection efforts. And then the final model is this individual producer responsibility model, or IPR. And this is where producers pay and manage individually. Individual producers are now individually responsible for meeting their own recycling targets. And the way this works is, say I'm Procter & Gamble and I sell so many packages into the state of Maine. I sell, some of them are in aluminum, some of them are in PET plastic, some of them are in glass. I have to report to an agency to say, this is the total amount of packaging materials I'm selling into the state, and now I have to prove that I've collected 60% or 80% of that total that I put into the state. And so the way that it works is that the recyclers do what they do, waste haulers do what they do. They go around and collect recycled materials from winning local government contracts, all the ways they do it now, servicing multifamily dwellings, servicing the commercial sector, and then they sell those credits to the producers so that the producers can prove that they're meeting their recycling targets. So the producer demand for credits drives demand for recyclables, which drives up commodity value at the point of collection. And the only way this system works is it's critical. You've got to have an independent oversight body that's verifying that the credits that have been sold to the producers are actually tied to measured recycling activity. But this completely gets around the competition and antitrust issues. It has not yet been tried in North America, but the EU is moving in this direction. Germany has the oldest EPR for packaging program on the books, and they have moved away from this collective model to an individual model. And not only have they boosted their recycling targets across the board, they've also cut system costs by somewhere in the order of 30 to 40%. And so, we think that there's a lot of promise here. Also, Ontario, that was the product stewardship model that I was mentioning earlier. They are looking at they have a bill that's being looked at by the province right now to move towards this IPR system. And I should also say there's a precedent in Maine with e-waste law. I know a lot of you folks are familiar with the e-waste law. The computer manufacturers in Maine, they are individually responsible for collecting their own stuff. So if the computer comes into e-waste solutions in Lewiston, Auburn, and it says Dell on it, Dell's responsible. If it says HP on it, HP is responsible. So we have that precedent for here in Maine. It's a fair, we believe, a fair way to do things. So quick review here. With product stewardship, you've got producers paying, but they don't manage the system. Little market disruption, but lackluster results. This is not a goal-driven system. With collective extended producer responsibility, you've got producers that pay and manage collectively to meet their targets. Potentially lots of market disruption. The results are to be determined in BC, but we've got a lot of good info in Europe that says we can get very high collection and recycling rates from this kind of system. But again, there's might be a lot of sacrifice in order to get there. With the individual producer responsibility, the producers pay and manage individually through a credit system. Potentially a lot less market disruption and better results, but we've never tried this in North America on packaging. And with that, I'll close and let Melissa get into some more of the details here. But I just want to close with a personal note. For me, we live on a finite planet and with finite resources. And we're projected to have somewhere in the order of 9 to 10 billion people sharing this planet with us in the middle part of the century. And a lot of folks around the world want to live like us. And I think that we as Americans have a moral responsibility to ensure that we squeeze every last ounce of use out of the materials and energy that we harvest from the planet. And I think that EPR for packaging is one of those strategies that can help get us there, and that's a big reason why my organization is out there advocating for it. So thank you very much, and Melissa, I'm sorry, I couldn't bring you back up. Thanks very much, really appreciate it. Nice to be here with you folks.